Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Our participant list is just being populated here, but I do think we will get started as it is 4 o'clock. My name is Caron Daley. I'm the president of the American Choral Directors Association of Pennsylvania, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to part one of our Resilient Leadership series. And this session, of course, is about celebrating our leadership in changing times, and our guest is Dr. Hilary Apfelstadt. We've had some extraordinary experiences since March as choral directors. We've exercised courageous leadership in many ways, and that is why this topic is of such interest to me. We're learning to practice our craft in new ways and become more innovative, rehearsing online, advocating for our programs, trying to figure out how to balance work and life and home. So today we're going to delve deeper into this topic, learn more about Hilary and her work as Interim Executive Director of the American Choral Directors Association. We'll learn a little bit about principles of leadership and possible strategies as we find ourselves in unprecedented leadership situations. So sit back and enjoy. As you have questions, please put them in the chat box. I will be monitoring that. We want today's session to be interactive. And so Hilary and I will be talking back and forth, and we will have time for questions at the end of today's session. So a welcome to Hilary, my long-term mentor, 20 years, I think. And we're so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate the invitation, Caron.
Sure. Let's get started. I'm very interested to know about how you became interested in leadership. Like for many of us, leadership is just sort of synonymous with what we do as choral directors, but you have taken this conversation so much further, thought about it from so many perspectives, from personality to how we talk to choristers to how we interact with graduate students. And I'd just like to know how this topic came to life for you.
You know, I was thinking about that because you did let me know you'd ask that question. And in some respects, I almost feel as if I fell into it because in terms of ACDA, at least, I remember being in North Carolina. I was teaching at UNC Greensboro. And my then colleague, who was Richard Cox, was serving as the treasurer and the president, both, of ACDA in North Carolina. And he said, look, I could really use some help. Can you balance a checkbook, which is what we did in those days? And I said, well, sure. So away I went. And, then I kind of went through the ranks. But by being state president in North Carolina and then a regional leader and then eventually national president. But I think there are other things when I look back at my life. I think about my parents always saying to my sister and me, if you see a need, you should help. And so that was, even though I was a shy child, I grew up with that sometimes you just have to overcome that. And if somebody needs your help, you should try to do something. And of course, my father was a minister, so he was in a service profession. There were a couple of other things too. I had a very strong female mentor as a doctoral student. She was head of music ed, but then she became the director of the School of Music at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was very brusque. Her leadership style is different from mine. But by the same token, it was she who had a shower when my daughter was born. She'd never had children in her life. And I remember going in and being almost afraid to tell her I was pregnant. And she said, oh, we'll work that out. We'll get somebody else to look after your student teaching supervision and so forth. But by the same token, I could see her bring a room of people to their knees. She was so brusque at sometimes, but she was the first, she was really my first example of a woman at the graduate level, because previously my teachers had all been male. There was one other thing. The first group of student teachers I ever supervised had a vast array of leadership abilities within it. Everything from a young woman who worked so hard to prepare and yet would go in a classroom and struggle to get the students' attention, to somebody else who, on the other hand, who was very cavalier. And I don't know if he ever planned anything, but he had this command, and he was a good musician, and he was what some people would call a born leader. And then in Greensboro, I had a grad student who was interested in leadership. And from there on, I mean, those things kind of came together. And then once I started reading the literature about leadership. I just really never stopped.
That's interesting. And I know you've published a lot on this topic, right? And there are some wonderful
I have
things we
some.
can read. um, as we think about what we're experiencing today, I think about my own leadership, and I think about how many times I felt stretched as a leader this summer. And it's not only been about how on earth do I teach choir online, but also how do I make decisions that have a very wide impact about people's safety and
Right.
about access and inclusivity, and how I shape pedagogy and curriculum in these brand new paradigms that we're facing
Right.
in 2020. So what is it that we are experiencing right now as choral leaders from a leadership perspective?
Well, I think it's everything you said, Karen. It's a myriad of circumstances and the emotions that come out of those and the feelings. I think most people that I talk to, and this is both from an organizational and a musical perspective, they are very stressed, they're tired. Um, they feel powerless in a lot of ways. And it's about trying to do the best they can, but without having the same kind of comfort level that we all had previously. I know even from doing Zoom presentations in classes, I can spend twice as long preparing for something like that as I would to go into the classroom and just interact with a group of people. And then if you're faced with the technology of figuring out how you're going to teach choir on Zoom and those kinds of things, or if you're in a school situation where you have some kids online and some kids present in front of you, how do you juggle that? At the same time, I think we should be proud of ourselves, because when I see the courage that people have displayed, the agility, the mental agility, the flexibility, it's that sort of can do, we're going to make this work because the kids count, or the adults I work with. That's what really matters. I saw a really wonderful video the other day that somebody posted on Facebook, and I shared it on my page. The speaker is the superintendent of schools in the Hilliard, Ohio school district. He stood in a school library and he just spoke almost extemporaneously. He probably had it well prepared, but he just had that ease. And what he said was, because it was directed to the teachers, he said, do not worry that you are not meeting every expectation of the curriculum. That is not what matters right now. What matters now is the safety, the health, the emotional well-being of our students and of you. And we will all catch up, but now is not the time essentially to beat yourself up because you don't feel like the good teacher you were before. And it was just stellar. He took about 5 minutes, and I thought, oh, everybody needs to read this. But he had exactly the right message. And I think that's, we have to think about what we can do. And we've got some good resources, but certainly people are tired. And I think the hardest thing is not knowing where the light is at the end of the tunnel. Usually most of us will say, oh, I can do anything for, and then we'll say a certain amount of time for 2 weeks or a month, or I can make this work. I only have a year left of grad school, or I have 10 years left of my mortgage, or whatever it is. But right now, we don't know where the tunnel ends. And I think it's that uncertainty when we as choral directors are used to being in control of many things, we are not. And so I think we have to do the best we can and not forget to give ourselves credit for what we're doing well, because there's a lot of good going on as well.
Yeah, certainly a lot of innovation and ideas, and so much crowdsourcing and so much
Yes,
support, and
yes,
this sense of worldwide community that,
right.
things that we maybe never experienced before
Mhm.
have been an outcome of our situation this year, and that's to be celebrated too.
I
Um,
agree.
so as we think about leadership and how can we become better at it? I mean, certainly this scenario has helped us to become better at it, but how can we reflect on our own leadership? How can we develop skills? And I know you've got some things that you can teach us today too about principles of good leadership in general.
Well, I
So
think these are probably things that we all know, but sometimes seeing what you have seen before. Um, Hang on here just a minute. Let me share the screen. And let me know, Caron, if you're seeing what I'm seeing.
That looks good.
Okay. So I like this. I like this first slide because when I spoke earlier about leadership in hard times, or about the light at the end of the tunnel, there it is, somewhere down the road, and we're on the move toward it. So the basic thing is what is leadership? And I'm going to use a very standard definition, which is that it's getting a group of people to work together toward a common goal. And obviously, sometimes that is easier said than done, but let's base it on that as a common premise. And then I think there are both personal and professional qualities, and I think they are equal. So both the head and the heart are here. And we spoke just a few minutes ago about that superintendent talking about the caring qualities. I always think of leadership in terms of task and relationship. It's from situational leadership theory. And this is a place where we may need to go more to the relationship part even than we do to the task. And we may have to back away on some of our musical goals, perhaps work on a little bit less repertoire than we would normally do, but maybe we can go into it in more depth. You and I talked about how you were doing that in your own situation the other day, and you seem to feel that there were actually some good things to be had from that. Why don't you talk about that for a little bit, and then I'll go on.
Oh, sure. Well,
Is that okay?
yeah,
Put
absolutely.
you on the spot.
I guess some surprising outcomes, like I went into the semester knowing less material, simpler material, fewer, demands on students in terms of, what we would accomplish. But I put the focus more strongly on musical skill building and
Mhm.
on voice building. And now that we're almost through the semester, we can kind of reflect and say that one of the most successful things this semester has been the development of independent musicianship in
Excellent.
my students. And they uniformly seem to say this: I'm a better sight reader. I know how to sing through a mask. I've discovered new ways to sing healthily through a mask. Or when I sit alone in my room on a Zoom rehearsal, because half of my students will be on Zoom, I don't always hear the piano, and I don't hear the context of the other parts, and I'm singing alone, and I'm hoping I've got the right note. So, in many ways, it has been a wonderful exercise in developing leadership, actually.
Right.
And we've made the most of the situation. But as I reflect on my own leadership, it has required a lot of adaptive
Absolutely.
strategies. And I set up a syllabus that was somewhat loose, and then I filled in the gaps as I went, and it has involved many twists and turns.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm
it's
sure.
been very interesting.
Yeah, I think adaptability is a hallmark of good leadership. Here are some things in terms of when we were thinking about leading organizations, and choirs or organizations, ACDA is an organization. Um, I always think the first thing is to listen, and then listen harder. We have to listen to what it is that the people around us need. Sometimes we see that it's a kind of a visual listening. You see it in the body language. I'm sure you see that when you're on Zoom. When you're on Zoom, or you realize that a student hasn't checked in, they haven't put their camera on for a while because there's a reason they're tired, or they don't want you to see where they are, or something like that. But one of the first things for a leader is to listen. And then the second, I think, is building relationships. This is very, very important. Um, be flexible. You spoke about this. I always think, you have to have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C, and none of them may work. And so what do? Then you go back and you listen again and see if you can pick up the cues. Be resourceful. And this is so important now. What can we do? That's what we have to focus on. I know we all miss things, and it's easy to focus on what's absent, but we have to think about what is present, or what could be present. I think finding a mentor is important. And these days, a mentor does not have to be somebody older than you are. For example, if I am looking for a mentor in IT, I know I'm not going to find somebody in my age bracket necessarily, but I will find somebody in my children's, in their 30s perhaps, or their 20s, or their teens. That's the person who can mentor me on that. So if I if I want to do a virtual choir, but I don't have the skills, I need to find a mentor who can help me. I think transparency is important in leadership, being able to say, this isn't working right now, or I'm having a hard time with this, I need help. Don't be afraid to be transparent. And then very, very important is about the importance of being trustworthy. I think if people trust us and they know that we're doing our best, they are more likely to follow us. Here's some other qualities of strong leadership. These actually come from a Canadian website that I'll cite at the end. Conviction, vision, absolutely. There's that communication again, that's very important. Delegation, when we can, because we can't handle everything ourselves, we need to be able to delegate, obviously, to people we trust. But what can you give away? What can you take off your plate? What is not worth your priority A-list time? Flexibility, you said this before, Caron, when you used the word agility. I think that they are synonyms. And appreciation, making sure that the people that we're working with know that we appreciate every effort they're making. Sometimes when it's with students who are just overloaded with assignments, being able to say to them, I know you're having a hard time, let's stretch this out a little bit and give you another week, or, you know, would it help if we took this part out? These days, everybody that I know is teaching in a university is talking about having to be very flexible with what they grade and how they grade, and the importance of that. And this comes from, it's a Business Development Bank of Canada, and I went on there looking for qualities of strong leadership in women, but these are very generic things. I have become a great fan of David Rubenstein. He has a program on CNN. He's a great writer. He published very recently, as in September, a book called How to Lead, and it's got a lot of interviews with people two musicians that come to mind are Yo-Yo Ma and I was going to say Kathleen Battle, and it's not. Renee Fleming is the musician. Anyway, the things that he drew from that, I was just watching him the other day do a talk, and he said that one of the things he learned from Oprah Winfrey, for example, was how well she listens to people, that above all is her strength. And she has become a leader in many ways. Look what she's done for education, for example. He talks about Jeff Bezos, who builds customer relationships. That's his strength. Anthony Fauci, he cites him for his courage. Every day we're reading something about that man in the paper, and he just keeps coming back to us and reinforcing what he knows from science. Tim Cook supports teamwork. He took over from, thank Hilary. Here's the aging brain. I'm going to remember. Anyway, he talks about the importance of teamwork and working in a unit as a leader, not trying to do everything themselves. And then Rubenstein was asked, what do you think? What would you say to a young person who wants to be a leader today? And he said, these are the things. They need to be dedicated, caring, selfless, ethical, humble, team players. They have to lead by example, and they have to know what it's like to fail. And I thought that was really, really interesting. That vulnerability, I think, makes them more human in many ways. But I have a copy here of this book. I'm not getting a cut on the book, but if you go on the Barnes and Noble website or anywhere like that, it is fascinating. He's just given each person a few pages, but it's so interesting to read their backgrounds and how they became leaders, many of them not intentionally at all. So what I've done here, there's some advice to new leaders, and I have tried to sort of translate this for choral conductor educators for thinking about ourselves here. Just a second, I have just done something funny to my thing here, and why is this not coming up? There we go. So I mentioned this a minute ago, not to be afraid to fail. We are all going to fail in some ways, and one of the things that worries me right now is that I see teachers who are just beating themselves up about this, and we're in a field where failure is not acceptable. but we are working with circumstances that we are not able to control. So think about controlling what you can and don't worry about the rest. Focus for us as conductors, be in the present rather than dwelling on the way things were. We do have to be thinking toward the future, and we're going to talk about that later, but really in the moment. We're great multitaskers, and this is probably not the time to be trying to do that with excellence. Rubenstein talks about surrounding yourselves with people smarter than you are. I think if we have a network of resources, we can take comfort in that. And one of the ways we've shown our resilience over the summer is through the plethora of resources, everything from the ACDA National Committee on COVID to the Western region, which came out with an even more detailed plan. I noticed in Canada, many of the provinces have come out with their plans now. We've had wonderful initiatives from people. We've got Facebook pages. We have all kinds of things. Derek Fox and his colleagues came up with something where there are all kinds of teaching plans. Just find the place where you've got those resources and some people, and let those people help you lead. Rubenstein says we need to be able to write well, and these days we have to advocate. One of the fears is that if we don't have choir for a year in a high school, it may not come back. So while we're figuring out how to teach on Zoom, we also have to be advocating. And I would mention that ACDA has a new website for advocacy, and we've got 2 really strong leaders who are driving that. Speak well, he says, and for us as musicians, again, that's about advocating. And this one is important, to give back to society. He's committed to giving away all of his money except what he kept for his kids to get them through school. Now, he has a lot of it, so I'm sure that if he keeps a little, he has more than we would, but it's an interesting thought. I think if we take our minds off ourselves as much as we can and constantly be thinking about who it is we're trying to help, and maybe it's that first year teacher. Can you imagine this being somebody's first year of teaching? Oh my goodness. Try to think outside of ourselves. And then one of my other favorite people to read is Doris Kearns Godwin. She's written about American presidents, and her latest book, Leadership in Turbulent Times, she cites these 2, among others, as being very important: humility and empathy. And right now, we certainly need those in abundance. It's a tough time. And so a couple of takeaways: blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape. I don't really know who said that first, but it's fun, but it's so true. And the other one, Ralph Waldo Emerson: do not follow where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. So make your mark in your own way. I think all of us have the capacity to do that. And it doesn't matter if it's in your neighborhood or if it's on a bigger scale, you are helping somebody. And that really is what, to me, is key about leadership. It's being helpful. And I think that takes us to the end of that.
That's great. That's a very nice, framework for us to think about this. And again,
Okay.
sometimes I think some of these things are taken for granted for us in our field.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
know that we're leaders. We know when we lead a rehearsal on the podium that we are the person who has studied the score the most and has ideas about where we want to go and curriculum and all of that.
Yeah.
But to sort of think about the personality traits or the attributes that we can try to develop is a nice way to frame it. And so let me ask you, I think some of what you just presented, you indicated that maybe for choral directors could be more challenging. Things like we are used to being in control, or we're used to multitasking.
Right.
I don't know that we're necessarily used to asking for help sometimes.
I agree. I
And
think we're not.
yeah. And so whether these things are an aspect of our personality or they're more shaped by professional practice, can you give us any tips on how can we develop some of these wonderful skills and attributes?
Well, the interesting thing about not asking for help, I think that comes from a place of pride. And we all have it. I mean, it's part of who we are. It's the part of ego that keeps us functioning. And it's not ego in a bad way. But it is okay, and in these times more than any other time, it is okay to say, this is hard for me, because the fact is we're all in it together. No matter whether you are working with a church choir, or you are an administrator of a group, or you're teaching at a university or a public school, wherever you are experiencing some of the same fears. And just simply to be able to talk to another person, you will be surprised by how quickly they can come right back and say, I completely understand what you're saying. I hear you. Maybe in the past, it would have been harder, but I think if you've ever been afraid to ask for help, now's the time to jump right in and do it. And you know, you can, if there's a person that you trust, if there's somebody in an organization you know, or a teacher in your school, and you think you may not know them personally that well, or just somebody who's been there a long time and they know the lay of the land, just try to connect to that person. You can't do it over coffee, but you can have your coffee cup on Zoom and just see if you can make that connection with them. And then help can also be in a less personal way, simply by seeking out some of those resources. What I've noticed on some of the Facebook pages that's so interesting, and I never read the whole thread because it would take forever, but I'll see the first question about, I'm really having trouble with such and such. And right away, you'll see people will say, that's happening to me too. Here's what I tried. I don't know if it'll work in your situation, but for example, the other day there was one from a teacher in a rural school where she didn't have any colleagues at all in music, and it was a small population to begin with. And pretty soon somebody jumped on there who was in another state, but in a similar situation. And I can guarantee you that those two people will stay in connection, and that the first person who asked the question is going to be helped by the second one. And the second one may be helped too, just from sharing some ideas that they hadn't thought about before.
Well, feel free to put some questions in the chat box as we go on here. Hilary, do you have more PowerPoint, or do you want to maybe
No,
unshare?
I think that's it. And
You
I'll
want to
unshare my screen.
unshare your screen for a moment? And I definitely
No,
have.
I want to unshare that screen and see if I can. There we go.
There we go.
Oh.
I'm going to just dig a little deeper on that same topic, if I may. But I know that you've written a little bit about extroverts and introverts,
Right.
and how they interact with leadership. And again, naturally, sometimes we think about the conductor role as an extroverted role.
You do.
And some of us identify as introverted, or maybe right on the border between introversion and extroversion. And so when it comes to being an introvert these days and doing things like putting yourself out there, asking for help, resourcing colleagues and students, do you have any words of wisdom for the introverts?
Well, first of all, I want to credit my former student and now colleague, Marcy Major, who's there in Pennsylvania teaching at Westchester University. We've done some presentations together, and we're doing another one at National ACDA. I keep saying in Dallas, but it's not. It's online. Dallas online. One of the things that we always stress is that there is a continuum of behaviors. We talk about being an introvert or an extrovert. Somewhere in between, there's the ambivert, who can access characteristics of both. And you're exactly right, Caron, that there are elements of our profession that are very extroverted. For example, even being in front of a group, that takes some extroversion. There are other elements that are more introverted. Choosing the music, score study, those kinds of things, planning the rehearsal, getting ready to decide how you're going to make that ask to a donor. Before you connect with somebody else to say, well, what's your advice? You've got to think through it on your own. I believe that what enables the introvert to function well in our varied field is the commitment to and the passion for music. And I think if we keep that at the forefront, again, I don't want to look at those faces again on Zoom and see how disappointed they are, or get these little notes from my kids saying, oh, I miss choir, and all that kind of thing. If there's a way I can figure out how to make this better, or to coordinate with somebody in the next county or whatever it is, I need to do that. And sometimes it's about overcoming ourselves, or thinking, I know I'm an introvert, and it's hard for me, for example, still to go into a room full of people prior to March where I don't know anybody. That's hard. But if I speak to one person in that room, we can get a conversation going. And if I ask them about them, we can usually get a really good conversation going. So we're trying to get the conversation about music and about conducting going, even with that one person that we can find.
That's such a nice way to think about it, as like a conversation, and it's now
Mhm.
become a national and an international conversation, but
Absolutely.
it's happened person by person by person.
Yes.
Um, you just talked about something fascinating, and Joy has put a question in the panel, Joy Mead here,
Okay.
about inspiration for leaders. And
Mhm.
in this time where, we are really, really stretched to the limits, and self-care has become an extremely
Mhm.
important topic for us in
Yep.
leadership. How
Yes.
can we find inspiration ourselves? And Joy says, I'm going to read it because it's so great. I find that I'm a better leader and musician when I'm inspired myself.
Right.
I
That's
find
absolutely true.
I find COVID to be a joy sucker, and I find myself uninspired professionally to produce virtual performances.
Yeah.
Can you suggest any inspiring resources on leadership or on music to help rekindle our passion and inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I'm going to go at it from two angles, I think. And the first is I think that we have to be in a good mental state ourselves to accept inspiration. And that means taking care of ourselves. And I have found since the beginning of COVID that for me to go out and walk every day, mask or no mask, it depends on where I am, that I can come back and look at the emails and everything that's there and just simply feel better. I've done something for myself. I've been out. Some people talk about taking an awe walk, AWE walk. And when the leaves were changing, my gosh, it did so much for my mind. And then listening to music, I got past the point of regretting, of listening and saying, oh, I wish, but listening and saying, we're going to be able to do that again. And I have been reading things like this, the How to Lead, from people who are not necessarily musicians, because sometimes I find that what I need is I need a dose of practical, basic level thinking that then I can challenge myself to transfer to our field. So it's taking care of yourself, being healthy, getting that break. It's listening to music if that's one thing, or if it's watching old movies, whatever it is, but just give yourself. But I think we need to be listening to music. And then I think reading, TED Talks, whatever it is, even if you pick up a book and you read a chapter a week, there's going to be something in there that I did 2 book clubs on Zoom in April, May, and June, July. They overlapped and they weren't about music, but I learned a ton about just being.
That's funny when you read, thank you, Joy. When you read conducting textbooks, which is something I like to do for fun, very weird, I know, and you read about, they'll have these lofty statements like, be sure you know a lot about the liberal arts and study ancient Greek and Hebrew, or be sure you know your, foreign languages, things like this. And you think, oh my goodness, who has time? And
Right.
I, went to undergrad. I did my best, and here I am. I'm in the trenches, and and I really resonate with what you're saying in terms of looking outside our field for inspiration, because we are in a wonderfully inspiring field.
We are.
We are continuously inspired by our students and by music, but now is a time when some of those things are not occurring in the same way. And
They're not.
read a book about another topic, or to speak to someone outside your field,
Yeah.
and to feel like, okay, wow, I mean, there are things that I can help me reimagine
Right.
this, and I don't feel so weighed down by the
Right.
pressures I'm feeling within my
Right.
own context.
Yeah, because
Um,
everything is negative. I mean, if you really, and it's understandable, it's just plain fatiguing mentally and physically. And you know that what they always tell you in a plane if you're with a child, and they'll say, put on your own mask first. I mean, you really have to do that. And the self-care, as you called it at the beginning, is important. And some days you just think, ugh, too tired. And yet, don't ever be too tired to look after yourself.
right. So challenging. Yeah.
Mm.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned in your new role? And I know you've had this outstanding career as a conductor and conductor teacher. And I failed to mention that you were at Ohio State University and then at the
Yes.
University of Toronto, that you've mentored over 90 graduate students in your career, and people like me who came through your graduate programs and got really excited about some of the topics that you love too. And I think you've really inspired a generation or two of conductors. But now you're in a new position where you're in a more of an administrative role, and at a time when many organizations are facing just incredible change. So please tell us about that experience and what you've learned.
Well, first of all, I think the learning curve is not quite as steep as it would have been if I hadn't been a member of ACDA and if I hadn't been a volunteer for so long. I even knew some of the office staff who worked there when I was national president. And so it was sort of relatively easy to come in. I knew more questions to ask than I might if I were, say, finding myself looking after interim executive director position of a museum or something out, still in the arts, but kind of outside of my field. I think some of the things that I showed on the PowerPoint have really come home to roost in the listening part of the first week that I was there. I met with every staff member, and we had in a couple of cases it was a phone conversation, but we had at least a half hour face to face to find out, what's your view of ACDA? Where are we right now? It's so different. Membership numbers are different. Here we are with our biggest source of income, quite frankly, which is the conference. That's threatened. What's going on and what's going on in your life? And then trying to do the same thing with the national board, the executive committee. I'm in touch with them all the time. But I think learning to prioritize, you sort of get the lay of the land. It's exactly what you're doing. You decide, out of all these things that I would like to do that I think should be done in the curriculum, which are the most important to do. And being in an interim spot is different from being in an ongoing spot. But by the same token, I feel as if I have to sort of clear the path for whoever comes after me, because there are mechanical things that need doing now that I can do and I don't mind doing. I can't travel. I can't, I have to be at home and making sure that things are working well there. The importance of being connected, I think, is very important. Connecting with trying to connect with state presidents, and we're doing it on Zoom, but this sounds so small, but answering emails when people write to me and ask about something, or they want to have a phone call, or of trying to be present and be right back to them. I have learned that there is a huge amount of loyalty in ACDA, and that people want it to survive, and they know it's being challenged now. But I'm really heartened by that, and we have terrific leadership. I mean, executive committee, everything, terrific leadership. So I believe we are at a crossroads, and I think we may take some different paths in the future, but I feel as if people are anxious to support that.
Is this an exciting time for our profession?
That's an interesting choice of words. Pollyanna might say so. And I, by nature, I'm an optimist. I would say it's an intriguing time. It's a time of potential, because some of these things that we're doing now, I believe we are going to take forward into the future. Some of the good things, I think, are going to go with us. Challenging, exciting, I don't know. I like going to work every day, even if I'm just going to the she shed to do it. I think there's a lot of possibility. I think we may be reframing ourselves as a profession. I'll tell you one thing, Caron, that does excite me, is the conversation about the potential conflict between musical excellence and the use of music as a tool for social justice and all kinds of things. That is not a conversation that I had going through in school. You and I didn't have that when you were in grad school. That is a conversation that we should have been having for hundreds of years, but we are finally having now. And I think there's one of the places that we are really going to see a rebirth, a renaissance in our profession. I think both can exist. They can coexist. But it is going to change some things, and I think it can change them for the better.
Yeah, it feels like the role of the conductor is evolving, and to me that's exciting. Not
Yeah.
everything we're experiencing is exciting, but the
No.
potential, as you
Yep.
say, I think is exciting.
Yeah.
Let's hear from some other voices. We have some people here attending, and what would you like to ask Hilary? What are some questions that you have about leadership or her experiences with ACDA? Pop those in the chat. What else is on your mind as a leader these days, Hilary? Anything in particular? I mean, how are you sort of balancing home and work and life and family? I think that's something that's really very top of mind for people, is how to manage the work-life balance, particularly perhaps for women.
And I think for women of your age and stage, it's particularly hard. I mean, my context now is with grandchildren, and I had them here yesterday for 5 hours, but that's different from having them all the time. But I see in my own children the challenges is that they have. They're both my son and daughter-in-law are business owners, and they're trying to work as much as they can from home, and they have children who are 5 and 7. And but even for me, as somebody whose spouse is fully retired, I have to be mindful that my nature, which would be to continue working well past the dinner hour or whatever, that I need to bring that. I need to rein that in. That was always a challenge for me when I was teaching full time as well. But I understand that it's not healthy, and sometimes there's just nothing better than finding something that's really good on Netflix. And I love The Crown. It starts again on November 15th, so you can be sure that I will do that. I think it is important for us. What I feel badly about is the teachers who get their kids to bed if they're little, and then about 9 o'clock at night are starting everything for the next day and the rest of the week. And, my son comes home, he has a lighting business. He comes home, has dinner with the kids, and oftentimes goes right back out to work 9 o'clock and is coming home at midnight. And that is tough. It's not healthy for people to do that. So I would encourage everybody to try to find that balance, especially with so much screen time. I think we have to get away. If you're there for an hour, you've got to have the 5 minute away. What are we all doing to our eyes? I really wonder about that.
And I think the conversation has veered towards sustainability, because
Absolutely.
perhaps, we hoped that the pandemic would be short-lived.
We did.
And now it's really a marathon, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't even really hear people talking about the new normal anymore.
No.
We're simply in life.
Right. We're in life.
Living with this.
Right. I do think there is a tunnel. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's moved. But I think for the sake of our mental health, we have to keep thinking about the future. We have to keep thinking about what we're going to be able to do. And as I said earlier, which of the good things that we're doing now can we take forward with us?
We've got a question from Bobby.
Okay.
He says, I'm a senior. I'm in my senior year of my undergrad, and I'm teaching next fall. What can I do to excite students and get them to trust me if I teach solely on Zoom? How can I best get to know my students?
Oh my goodness, that is a tough one. I have a former student right now who is teaching solely on Zoom, and she told me that this sounds like such a small thing, but one of the most important things she has done is she has made sure that she uses their name every time she addresses them. She kind of does this round robin where every day there's a group of students, initially at the beginning of the year, that she could bring into the conversation, that they spend time doing that rather than just singing. They do sing as well. But I think it's making the connection. You would do it if you were in person. When people were coming into the class, you would be speaking to that kid. If the quarterback of the football team is in your class and he scored a touchdown on Friday night, you're going to talk to him. You're going to find him on Zoom and you're going to talk to him because they're still playing football. Can you believe that? We can't have choir, but they're still playing football. I understand.
It's such a good question. And I think
it's a great question.
There's so many things that we've lost, like the smell of the choral room and the vibe that we feel when we walk in the door.
Just that energy.
Yes.
That you feel. Yes.
But there are ways that we can recreate a form of that online. And it's really a good question, Bobby, and a challenging one. And you mentioned teachers who are parents. And I, as I teach undergrad, have a lot of empathy for Bobby and for those who are entering the professions, particularly those who entered the profession this year.
Yes.
But also those who are entering next year and the year following. And so that brings me to an interesting question. Maybe we're toward the end of our time here. We're thinking about sort of what are next steps. And for me as a conductor educator, I'm thinking about how does this change the conversation about how we teach conducting? And what about just in our own work as conductors, what are some next steps for us?
I think we have to prepare for a transitional time. I think it's not going to be the door opening wide and we're back to exactly what we were doing. So I think that we need to be thinking, for example, in terms of programming, we've had this time since the murder of George Floyd to really be thinking about how we're programming and what we're doing. And we've had lots of resources. I think of the 2 issues of the Choral Journal right now, which are on music by Black composers, and Marquis Scarrett is doing Zooms 10 times a day. And, they're just such good resources. I think we can be thinking already about how we are going to perhaps, you don't all need to, but some of us might need to rethink our programming. We might be thinking about programming less. We need to be looking for resources. We need to think about how we're going to stay connected. I think in terms of teaching conducting, we have to address the reality of if there is still some online teaching, and we have to address the reality of how do we bring people back when perhaps they've gotten out of the habit. They're either going to be so happy to be back, they'll just be overwhelmed and it'll be, a good time was had by all, or there's going to be a little hesitation. Well, I need to take physics this year and I need to. So how are we going to engage with the community where there are youth choirs? Maybe they're going to find a home there. How can we, if we're university teachers, make a circle with those people so that our students may be connected perhaps with a community group as much as they might have been with a school group before, or can we bring them both in? I'm just trying to think. It's that what can we do rather than what's missing again. I know it's a kind of make-do mentality, but my father always said, mind over matter, Hilary. And my mother's mantra was grace under pressure. And I think the two of those together, there's some good lessons. But I know people are talking about how they're getting to know individuals better. They've heard them sing individually. Can we move that into our assessment now? We didn't do so much of that before. If we have groups working in pods on things, if you've got students going out and working in a group of 4 on a madrigal, is there a way that in a program we can have a section which is student driven that way? And so we have 4 little groups coming out of it that have prepared, and what are they going to learn from that? There's a leadership lesson right there. It's like having 4 string quartets. I always think string quartets are just the best example of musical leadership, because everybody has a say.
Yeah, the choir itself is being reimagined. The instrument of the choir is being reimagined. And I've always said that the choir is you when I speak to students in a choir, but it's coming home this semester. The choir is you. It's us. It's all of us. And it's also groups of us and partners and trios and quintets. And that is such a nice way to think about programming. And I love your idea of interconnectivity with the community. And I think I know that we will come we'll move forward with less of a sense of being siloed as choral conductors.
I hope so.
And more of a sense of connectivity and working collaboration, which is something we have long celebrated in our field,
right?
But we are thinking about it in brand new ways.
And I think with other artists, one of the things that this has given us time to do is explore text more fully. And so when you see some of the online things, I mean, I watched something the other day from Vocal Essence. Was it Joy who asked? Was that her name, Joy Mead? Okay, to be inspired. Look at Vocal Essence. They had this fabulous program on suffragettes and women's voice and so forth. And they had a speaker between, and they interviewed people who were children of immigrants and how they felt about things in the way the world was, and then connected it to music. It was wonderful. So if you're in a university, can you bring the theater department together with you? Can you find the English literature people? Can you go to Romance languages? And, you know, I just think there are lots of possibilities. That is exciting to me. That makes me wish I had not retired from teaching.
Well, we have learned a lot about leadership in today's session, and I just want to give a chance for anyone else who wants to pop a question in there. I know it's been a really exciting conversation just to think about, just to pause and to think about how we can move forward in our jobs and to celebrate what we have accomplished, which actually is sometimes hard to stop to do that with all the panic and fear going on. We've got one more question here from Linda Tedford. She says, for those of us in the community choir category, our options are Zoom or nothing. Venues for rehearsals and concerts, even if we could gather in small groups, are closed to outside groups. Trying to keep my group together, but on Zoom is so frustrating.
I bet it's tough. And are you doing it every second week or every week? Or I know that's what the Columbus Symphony Chorus is doing. They're meeting every second week, and they have people coming in and doing that kind of thing. It's getting cold in Pennsylvania, but here's what the Columbus Gay Men's Chorus did. They have been rehearsing in the parking garages at OSU. And they are all spread out, and people bring chairs. And so the fellow who leads it will have X number of people there at a time. They have their masks on and they're singing. Now, you might not be able to rent a church space. Maybe that's something to look forward to next spring. You know, they tell us, the Colorado study tells us it's safer to be outside than it is inside. But, you know, we had at the church choir, had a drive-in, literally like a corral. Everybody brought their cars in a big circle and stood outside their cars and sang hymns a cappella. Can you do anything like that? Bundle up, wear your parka. Even 1 or 2 times. Can you Christmas carol somewhere? Even 1 or 2 times with small groups, just so they see each other.
And that's what I'm hearing. It's missing seeing one another so much. And Linda says that they're done. Well, they're working on a virtual concert, and they're done for now, but they're taking a break till January. And I know I am. I'm sure others are just waiting for December at this point to just get a little pause and a chance to recharge.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a long fall, long summer and fall, but and that I will just do a short commercial right there for our event that we have on January 9th. It's called January Jumpstart. And it makes me laugh. It's like, you know, getting a jump to your car if it dies in the winter or something. But it's a morning long professional development on sessions on inclusive teaching practices and repertoire. And we have people coming from all over the country to speak with us. We're very excited. So that actually gets launched. This is a preview. It gets launched in our email later today. But we want to say a big thank you to you, Hilary. This has been so informative and also just such a nice time to chat and feel like we can connect and learn from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Caron. I appreciate it. Good luck to everybody.
Yes. Good luck, everyone. I hope you make it to the holidays and stay in touch. Thanks for joining us.
Don't forget to come to the conference that's not in Dallas.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you later.
Bye.